If you were to go out into the general public and bring wrestling up, the normal person would automatically assume that you're talking about WWE, and this is testament to the empire that Vincent Kennedy McMahon has built, as wrestling was synonymous with WWE, especially in the West. But ever since 2019, a company reared its head into the wrestling world, and that is All Elite Wrestling, AEW. And this is a company that is a product of a wrestling revolution headed by Tony Khan, who is part of a multi-billion-dollar family. And because of this, WWE are genuinely concerned with AEW. So up to this point, they have made certain moves to hinder AEW's growth. And on the surface, to the average person, it seems like these moves are petty, but there's a legitimate reason why WWE have done these things. To protect their monopoly in wrestling. There's an actual economic war going on in wrestling between Vincent Kennedy McMahon of the WWE and Tony Khan of All Elite Wrestling. Now, what is a monopoly? A monopoly is when a single company or group owns all or nearly all of the market share for a given type of product or service. An example of this would be Google, as they dominate the market for search engines. A monopoly is characterized by the absence of competition. Companies do not have to have a pure monopoly, which means 100% of the market share, in order to exercise monopoly power. When a single company has a huge market share in a single industry, they hold the same power that a pure monopoly does, as is the case with WWE. WWE have monopolized the wrestling industry through horizontal integration. Horizontal integration is the act of buying companies that produce similar results. And in this case, this would be WWE buying other wrestling companies. This started way back in the 1980s, as wrestling used to be comprised of territories, which meant that each regional area in the USA had a wrestling promotion. That is, until Vincent Kennedy McMahon bought them all out. And in the 90s, a competitor rose up to WWE in World Championship Wrestling, WCW. But once again, in 2002, Vincent Kennedy McMahon bought them out. And since the acquisition of WCW by WWE has had a hold on the wrestling industry, as there have been no real competitors for them. New Japan Pro Wrestling and Impact Wrestling, formerly known as TNA, were their biggest competitors ever since the acquisition of WCW. But for the casual wrestling fan in the West, the barrier of entry to watch New Japan Pro Wrestling was a little bit too high, and TNA, quite frankly, were not on the level of WWE, and they did not have nearly the amount of reach or financial backing that WWE had. So basically, if a Western casual fan wanted to watch big-time wrestling, they could only watch it in WWE. And in this way, there were no viable close substitutes. And this meant that WWE had a monopoly in wrestling and had full control over the Western wrestling market. But why are we so worried about monopolies? Monopolies are harmful because if there are no competitors, this leaves the consumer at the mercy of the monopolist. And this gives the monopolist company the reins to exploit their consumers, charge them higher prices for goods, and potentially give them inferior quality goods. Effectively, this gives the monopolist company the reins to abuse their power, as is the case with WWE, as they had the reins to charge high prices for merchandise and for tickets for shows. WWE also had no incentive to really put out the best product that they could, because they knew that the consumer would just eat it up anyway. And this approach actually hurt WWE, as they have had steadily declining ratings over the years. But despite the declining ratings, WWE still had a monopoly in wrestling. That is until Tony Khan and All Elite Wrestling showed up in 2019. AEW have been a massive threat to WWE's monopoly, as they have acquired a significant amount of the wrestling market. The war between WWE and AEW has really only been about one thing: market share. Market share is the percentage of total sales in one industry contributed by one company. So picture this, and these numbers may not be accurate, but for the purposes of this video will suffice. Pre-2019, WWE must have had a 90% market share, but when AEW came along, WWE's market share must have decreased to 60%, while AEW acquired 30% of the market share, with the other 10% going to other US-based promotions. Remember, these numbers may not be accurate, but these are reflected in the ratings for the TV shows for WWE and AEW. AEW's live weekly viewership sits at around 800,000 to 1.2 million viewers every week, while WWE Raw's weekly ratings are around about 1.5 million to 1.8 million, while WWE SmackDown's live weekly viewership is around 2 million to 2.1 million. This shows that AEW is not very far away from WWE in terms of market share. So WWE have been doing anything in their power to stifle AEW's growth so that they can maintain their monopoly in wrestling. Monopolies are able to erect obstacles and barriers to entry so that new competitors will have a hard time prospering in the industry. And WWE have tried to do this to AEW by putting their developmental brand NXT in the same time slot as AEW's Dynamite. This counter-programming was all done in an effort to limit AEW's market share. And it actually worked, as AEW's viewership was not at the level that it could have been with no competition on Wednesday nights. But despite this, AEW consistently beat NXT in the ratings and forced them to move to Tuesday nights. Another way WWE tried to lessen AEW's market share was through stockpiling on talent. To maintain a monopoly, a company can try to control the supply chain resources. And in WWE's case, they tried to maintain their monopoly by stockpiling on human resources. WWE was signing wrestlers left, right, and center, and many a time after a wrestler appeared in AEW, they were offered a contract by WWE. This was done to entice the wrestlers away from AEW and make sure that AEW didn't permanently get their hands on any future stars. This didn't work though, because majority of the time when a wrestler appeared in AEW, they either stayed in AEW or they went back to the independent circuit. WWE have also tried to stifle AEW's growth by calling their sponsors and criticizing them for endorsing AEW's edgy and bloody content. A lot of these attempts by WWE to maintain their monopoly over AEW have hindered AEW, but it has not destroyed them, and AEW have broken through all the obstacles and barriers that WWE has laid out for them. AEW have provided the consumer with something that was missing from Western wrestling for so long, and that prevents a monopoly, and that is choice. Choice for the consumer is very important because it ensures that every wrestling company produces a better product, and it also lowers the price of the product as there is a viable alternative for the consumer. AEW is also trying to ensure that other wrestling companies like New Japan Pro Wrestling and Impact Wrestling and other promotions are successful and have a significant portion of the market share, and they do this through working with them and giving them a platform on their TV shows. This is another threat to WWE's monopoly, as it is putting the mechanisms in place to make sure that an oligopoly prevails. An oligopoly is when a few firms control a large majority of the market share. AEW is trying to replace WWE's monopoly with an oligopoly, and even though this is not a perfect market, it is more conducive to a healthy wrestling economy, as there is more big places for wrestlers to work, wrestlers getting higher salaries, more viable big-time alternatives to WWE, cheaper access to wrestling for fans, and a better product overall, and many other things. So who's the real winner in all of this? The fans. WWE still has a massive market share in wrestling. Tony Khan has managed to take a lot of market share from WWE, and this has effectively destroyed their monopoly in wrestling. However, the war is not over, and it will likely never be over. But in the future, AEW may overtake the market share that WWE has, as Vince McMahon is planning to sell the WWE very soon, and this has been shown by the appointment of Nick Khan, who is making sure that WWE is in the healthiest state possible before it is sold. Nick Khan is the reason why WWE signed the $1 billion deal with Peacock and have released over 100 wrestlers in the last 2 years. Depending on who WWE gets acquired by, it could make or break the company, and this could cause AEW to overtake WWE in market share, but time will only tell. Thank you for watching the video. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and follow me on my socials. But anyway, until next time, goodbye.